first, we have, well, he's been a guest on the show before, Judge Chris McCool. He is running for the Alabama Supreme Court to pick a spot on it, let's say. Judge, how are you this afternoon?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you on the program. So for folks who didn't hear the first time we had a conversation, let's just give them the Chris McCool 101. Who is Chris McCool?
You ask different people, they might tell you different things. I'll give you my own assessment, though. I grew up on a farm in Pickens County. I'm from Gordo, Alabama, and I guess really, if you ask me who I am, I'm a farmer at heart, but I ended up going to law school. I've served for about 24 years as a prosecutor. Most of that as district attorney in West Alabama Circuit, 24th Circuit, Pickens, Fayette, Lamar County. Since 2018, I was blessed to be elected to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, and I've served as a judge on that court, and now I'm running for place 1 on the Alabama Supreme Court. So I'm a conservative judge, father, now grandfather, and pastor of a small church locally. So quite a few irons in the fire, but hey, it's I love what I'm doing. So that's in a nutshell who I am.
Well, and I don't know if I heard it there. Is it War Eagle or Roll Tide?
Well, it's Roll Tide. I went to Alabama. My kids all went to Alabama, but one of my favorite people is David Housel, who is from Gordo, Alabama. As you know, is big time War Eagle. So I love both sides, but I guess if it came down to it, I'd have to say I'm a Tide fan. But I'm not. I'm one of those that we're proud of our favorite son, David Housel, and glad to know him.
Well, it's just, I think Alabama being in the national news these days, for a second bothers me by how we're represented in the national press, and then I remember all the good things we have that they don't know about,
right.
And I think we'll be all right, especially that rivalry there. Now, for folks who don't know, what is your judicial philosophy? When you say conservative, let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay, so obviously the general term for it is I'm a conservative judge. I'm not an activist judge. I don't believe that judges are here to impose their views. They're here to apply the law. So if you wanted to just, in the short version is, I don't believe in being a legislator in a black robe. I believe that the law, as passed by our legislature, is the law and not what I think it ought to be. Now, to expand that out a little bit, there's a really good article written by current Justice Jay Mitchell on our Supreme Court in the Alabama Law Review recently that talks about textualism versus living constitutionalism. Living constitutionalists believe that the Constitution is constantly evolving and doesn't mean today what it meant, 100 years ago or even maybe last week. It just depends on what the judge wants it to mean. I don't believe in that philosophy. I believe that the law, a textualist believes the law is the words on the page, and they have a historical and a linguistic meaning that we can get to. And that's what I believe about applying the law. It's not up to me to just say, well, I don't like it, I think I'll change it. That's something for the legislature to do. And so ultimately, that's my philosophy.
Well, there you go. And I think I'm very much in that camp. Though I wonder, when there is a problem like a mismatch with like the formal text of the law and then how it's actually being enforced, or how other judges might have been interpreting it through any sort of litigation, doesn't it come back down to the role of the legislature as opposed to, say, the judiciary on a lot of these questions? That if that's the text is the text, and it's not my job as a justice to change it.
That's exactly right. And I'll give you an example that I can talk about. I can't talk about any cases that are in front of me now or that might come, but there was one that came before us early on in my career as a judge on the Court of Criminal Appeals, where, some years ago the legislature passed sentencing reform. Well, inadvertently, and I know it was inadvertently because I know that from hearing from legislators afterwards, but and I knew it at the time, they eliminated the possibility for having what we call a split sentence, which is extremely important. It's not to get too technical, but a split sentence allows you to, they sentence somebody to 1 year, but yet they don't have to serve the year. They can serve 48 hours, 10 days, 30 days, 6 months, whatever, and then be on probation for the rest of that time. Well, they eliminated inadvertently the ability for courts to split a sentence in misdemeanor cases. I knew from having been a prosecutor and former criminal defense attorney, that's an extremely important tool in our district and municipal courts of this state. But yet the law didn't, it was what it was when we looked at it. As bad as I hated to from a experiential standpoint, and even as, a philosophical standpoint, I didn't want to do it. But I wrote the case that said, the law is what's on the words on the page, not what they intended. And so we ruled several years ago in that particular case that you could not split a sentence. Well, guess what happens? A legislator gets hold of that and they fix it. And my point being that that's the way it's supposed to work. We're not supposed to be the legislators. They're supposed to be the legislators. And even, when something's inadvertently done, it's case. So I stand by that position as to the way I'm supposed to approach ruling on cases.
Again, folks, we're talking to Judge Chris McCool. He is running for the Alabama Supreme Court. If folks want to donate to your campaign or volunteer or just find out more about you, how can they do so on their own?
Yes, you can go to McCoolforSupremeCourt.com. There's a link on there to get in touch with us. There's also a link to donate on there. You can look me up on Facebook or Instagram at Judge Chris McCool, and it will direct you to the website as well. So we welcome any input or feedback, any contact, and certainly anyone wants to get on board with the campaign and contribute, they can do it that way.
Yes, sir. Now, I was just mentioning, and I've been thinking about it a lot this week with Alabama and the national media. What is the reputation of, say, the legal mind of the people of Alabama, or let's say the legal community within Alabama? And I mean historically, like, does Alabama actually have a pretty outstanding record in terms of judges and lawyers and just great legal scholars and minds? Or are we the middle of the pack? Where do we sit in all this?
So I haven't seen any surveys, but in my opinion, we're at the very top. I mentioned Jay Mitchell earlier. There's several others on our Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court we have now, I won't try to name them all, but they're all great legal minds. We've had great legal minds. The court I serve on, I serve with Judge Bill Cole, Judge Richard Minor, Judge Beth Kellum, and Judge Mary Wyndham, and I'd put our court up against any court in the nation as far as the legal acumen of the judges, and I count myself to be the least of those. I feel like that Alabama, I don't know how folks in California look at us, but I don't really care either.
Right there, amen.
I'd be a little nervous if they thought we were doing well. So I feel like we're at the top of the list.
Well, and now I know you can't talk about any specific potential cases that could come up in front of you in the court, but I'm trying to see where the line is here. Can you give maybe some categories of some outstanding legal issues that the state has really been kicking the can down the road, or we just haven't had the right case to face a particular issue? Are there any kind of general ideas that have been out there that probably need to be dealt with in this state?
So, one of the first ones that comes to mind, I suppose, is abortion. Now, obviously, I'm not going to comment on any specifics, right. But what the U.S. Supreme Court did in the Dobbs case is they kicked that issue back to the states. So now it matters more than ever who serves on our state Supreme Courts. And again, what you need is, again, no comment on my opinion of the law. But I'm aware that, and you are too, I'm sure, that we're a conservative state, and our legislature has passed laws that tend to be conservative. Well, what you need are justices on our Supreme Court that aren't going to go back and decide, I don't like what the legislature did, I'm going to do it my way. That's how we got Roe versus Wade in the first place. They read into the Constitution something that wasn't there. What you need are judges with the right kind of judicial philosophy that are going to say, you know what? I'm going to interpret the law as it's written, and I'm going to apply it. I'm not going to, whether I agree with it or not, I'm not going to impose my will upon it. And now, to be clear, I'm a pastor of a church. I'm pro-life very strongly, but
right.
again, my job is to apply the law a year or two ago, it wouldn't have mattered whether I was pro-life or pro-choice, because the feds had that, the U.S. Supreme Court had that issue in their bosom, and states couldn't do anything about it. And I mention abortion primarily to say there are other issues I expect that will end up being sent back from the U.S. Supreme Court for us to consider. I don't know what those issues may be, but again, it matters who serves on our state Supreme Courts more than it ever has, because of the Supreme Court sending issues back.
Well, and my next question, and this is just for my own curiosity, I guess, hazard of the job here, but it's fun to speculate on, and I don't think you're going to see necessarily something in front of you. But why is it, when I look at, say, case law, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, but just sticking with, say, the freedom of speech, you have, reams and reams of paper if you had to print out all those decisions and all the ink that's been spilled, talking up, say, the First Amendment and those issues surrounding it. And you can think of a few others, but why is it, when I look at the Bill of Rights, the original one, the Ninth Amendment seems to be neglected in terms of how much it's in the courts, and it also doesn't seem to rule the day. Kind of my reading of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it presumes you have individual rights that we didn't list here in the first 10, and that these precede any government.
Absolutely. Well, just take the Second Amendment, for example. When you read the text of the Second Amendment, it doesn't say, okay, now we're going to give you the right to keep and bear arms. It says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It shall not be impacted, so to speak. And that presumes there was already such a right there. It's probably too long to go into, but there is a way that the Supreme Court has looked at unenumerated rights that do exist, such as the right, for example, to parent your child. That's been a right that's not set out in the Constitution, but it actually predated the Constitution. And the question becomes, is it firmly rooted in our jurisprudence, and is it something that would have a great impact, if it were not so? So, it's kind of, there's a way to look at those, but I agree with you. The Ninth Amendment, is neglected. But I think we're seeing a rise in a focus on states enforcing their own, the states' rights, so to speak, that are reserved to the rights that are reserved to the states and reserved to the people. And so, I think you got a good point there.
Well, no, I just appreciate that answer because selfishly, I think I just enjoy the way your mind works, hearing you talk. And I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. I like listening to lawyers and judges hash out all the details. But don't take that too kindly. I also I'm the guy who invites the Jehovah's Witness inside to talk for hours. So,
Listen, call me anytime you want to talk theology. I'll be more than happy to go there.
Oh, amen. Now we could do a week of shows on that, if not more. Well,
absolutely.
Well, before I let you go, again, if folks want to help you out in your campaign, donate, volunteer, how can they do so?
Go to www.McCoolforSupremeCourt.com or look me up on Facebook or Instagram at Judge Chris McCool, and we'd welcome the support and the contact, and be glad to respond to any questions.
Well, I appreciate your time, sir. We'll talk again soon, hopefully.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, folks, that is Judge Chris McCool, currently on the Court of Criminal Appeals, but he is running for Alabama Supreme Court, and